Good afternoon, this is Literary News. I am Camilla McGinnis. Mr. and Mrs. Bonnie Snaith are back from their year of traveling abroad and were seen for the first time rolling through Deerwood to attend cousin Georgiana's wedding to Edward Beck. Last Sunday, Joseph Pulitzer gave his daughter away to former newspaper enemy and now newspaper illustrator Jack Kelly. In other news, Mrs. Bennet's nerves have evaporated with joyous news of a suitor coming to call upon daughter Mary Bennet. Mrs. Bennet has already begun wedding preparations. George Warlegan has filed a lawsuit against Drake Khan for placing frogs.
We interrupt this message to bring you The Maidens of Green Gables.
This is Grace
And Catherine.
and we are extremely excited to be beginning our Scarlet Pimpernel read-along.
Very exciting.
Huzzah! So this week we'll be reading the first 3 chapters. I shall start out reading, and as much as I would like to, I will not be doing any French accents because I am terrible at them, which is very sad since we are partially French on our dear mama side. So, anyways, if I did try, it would sound more Italian than French. We have gone over this many a time, tried to fix it, and it doesn't work. Anyways, moving along.
So, Grace, why don't you take us away?
Hush. The Scarlet Pimpernel by Sir Percival Blakeney, Baronet. Or not, actually, it's by Baroness Orczy. Alright, Chapter 1. Paris, September 1792. A surging, seething, murmuring crowd of beings that are only human in name, for to the eye and ear they seem naught but savage creatures, animated by vile passions and by the lust of vengeance and of hate. The hour, some little time before sunset, and the place the west barricade at the very spot where a decade later a proud tyrant raised an undying monument to the nation's glory and his own vanity. During the greater part of the day, the guillotine had been kept busy at its ghastly work. All that France had boasted of in the past centuries, of ancient names and blue bloods, had paid toll in her desire for liberty and for fraternity. The carnage had only ceased at this late hour of the day, because there were other, more interesting sights for people to witness, a little while before the final closing of the barricades for the night. And so, the crowd rushed away from the Place de la Grève and made for the various barricades in order to watch this interesting and amusing sight. It was to be seen every day, for those aristos were such fools. They were traitors to people, of course, all of them, men, women, and children, who happened to be descendants of the great men who since the Crusades had made the glory of France, her old noblesse. Their ancestors had oppressed the people, had crushed them under the scarlet heels of their dainty buckled shoes, and now the people had become the rulers of France and crushed their former masters, not beneath their heel, for they went shoeless mostly in these days, but beneath the more effectual weight, the knife of the guillotine. And daily, hourly, the hideous instrument of torture claimed its many victims, old men, young women, tiny children, even until the day when it would finally demand the head of a queen and of a beautiful young... the head of a king and of a beautiful young queen. But this was as it should be. Were not the people now the rulers of France? Every aristocrat was a traitor, as his ancestors had been before him. For 200 years now, the people had sweated and toiled and starved to keep a lustful court in lavish extravagance. Now the descendants of those who had helped to make these courts brilliant had to hide for their lives, to fly if they wished to avoid the tardy vengeance of the people. And they did try to hide, and tried to fly. That was the fun of the whole thing. Every afternoon before the gates closed and the market carts went out in a procession by the various barricades, some fool of an aristo endeavored to evade the clutches of the Committee of Public Safety. In various disguises, under various pretexts, they tried to slip through the barriers, which were so well guarded by citizen soldiers of the Republic. Men in women's clothing, women in male attire, children disguised in beggars' rags. There were some of all sorts. Ci devant counts, marquises, even dukes who wanted to fly from France, reach England or some other equally accursed country, and there try to rouse foreign feeling against the glorious revolution, or to raise an army in order to liberate the wretched prisoners in the Temple who had once called themselves sovereigns of France. But they were nearly always caught at the barricades. Sergeant Bibot, especially at the West Gate, had a wonderful nose for scenting an aristo in the most perfect disguise. And then, of course, the fun began. Bibot would look at his prey as a cat looks upon the mouse, play with him, sometimes for quite a quarter of an hour, pretend to be hoodwinked by the disguise, by the wigs and the bits of theatrical make-up which hid the identity of a ci devant noble marquis or count. Oh, Bibot had a keen sense of humour, and it was well worth hanging round that west barricade in order to see him catch an aristo in the very act of trying to flee from the vengeance of the people. Sometimes Bibot would let his prey actually get out by the gates, allowing him to think for the space of 2 minutes at least that he really had escaped out of Paris, and might even manage to reach the coast of England in safety. But Bibot would let the unfortunate wretch walk about 10 meters toward the open country, then he would send 2 men after him and bring him back stripped of his disguise. Oh, that was extremely funny, for as often as not the fugitive would prove to be a woman, some proud marchioness who looked terribly comical when she found herself in Bibot's clutches after all, and knew that a summary trial would await her the next day, and after that the fond embrace of Madame la Guillotine. No wonder that on this fine afternoon in September the crowd round Bibot's gate was eager and excited. The lust of blood grows with its satisfaction. There is no satiety. Satiety.
Where?
Right there.
Where?
Right there.
I can't see.
Yes.
Satiety?
Satiating it. There's no satiating, but no satiety.
No, there's no... What?
There is no satisfying it. The crowd had seen 100 noble heads fall beneath the guillotine today and wanted to make sure it would see another 100 fall on the morrow. Bibot was sitting on an overturned and empty cask close by the gate of the barricade. A small detachment of citizen soldiers was under his command. The work had been very hot lately. Those accursed aristos were becoming terrified and tried their hardest to slip out of Paris. Men, women, and children whose ancestors, even in remote ages, had served those traitorous Bourbons, were all traitors themselves, and right food for the guillotine. Every day Bibot had had the satisfaction of unmasking some fugitive royalists and sending them back to be tried by the Committee of Public Safety, presided over by that good patriot, Citizen Fouquier Tinville. Robespierre and Danton both had commended Bibot for his zeal, and Bibot was proud of the fact that he, on his own initiative, had sent at least 50 aristos to the guillotine. But today all the sergeants in command at the various barricades had had special orders. Recently, a very great number of aristos had succeeded in escaping out of France and in reaching England safely. There were curious rumors about these escapes. They had become very frequent and singularly daring. The people's minds had become strangely excited about it all. Sergeant Robespierre had been sent to the guillotine for allowing a whole family of aristos to slip out of the North Gate under his very nose. It was asserted that these escapes were organized by a band of Englishmen whose daring seemed to be unparalleled, and how, from sheer desire to meddle in what did not concern them, spent their spare time in snatching away lawful victims destined for Madame la Guillotine. These rumors soon grew in extravagance. There was no doubt that this band of meddlesome Englishmen did exist. Moreover, they seemed to be under the leadership of a man whose pluck and audacity were almost fabulous. Strange stories were afloat of how he and those aristos whom he rescued became suddenly invisible as they reached the barricades and escaped out of the gates by sheer supernatural agency. No one had seen this mysterious Englishman. As for their leader, he was never spoken of, save with his superstitious shudder. Citizen Fouquier Tinville would, in the course of the day, receive a scrap of paper from some mysterious source. Sometimes he would find it in the pocket of his coat. At others, it would be handed to him by someone in the crowd, whilst he was on his way to the sitting of the Committee of the Public Safety. The paper always contained a brief notice that the band of meddlesome Englishmen were at work, and it was always signed with a device drawn in red, a little star-shaped flower which we in England call the Scarlet Pimpernel. Within a few hours of the recipient of this impudent notice, The citizens of the Committee of Public Safety would hear that so many royalists and aristocrats had succeeded in reaching the coast and were on their way to England in safety. The guards at the gates had been doubled. The sergeants in command had been threatened with death, whilst liberal rewards were offered for the capture of these daring and impudent Englishmen. There was a sum of 5,000 francs promised to the man who laid hands on the mysterious and elusive Scarlet Pimpernel. Everyone felt that Bibot would be that man, and Bibot allowed the belief to take firm root in everybody's minds. And so, day after day, people came to watch him at the west gate, so as to be present when he laid hands on any fugitive aristo who perhaps might be accompanied by that mysterious Englishman. "Bah!" he said to his trusted corporal. "Citizen Robespierre was a fool. I'd have been me now at the north gate last week." Citizen Bibot spat on the ground to express his contempt for his comrade's stupidity. "How did it happen, citizen?" asked the corporal. "Robespierre was at the gate, keeping good watch," began Bibot, pompously, as the crowd closed in round him, listening eagerly to his narrative. "We've all heard of this meddlesome Englishman, this accursed Scarlet Pimpernel. He won't get through my gate, morbleu, unless he were the devil himself. But Robespierre was a fool. The market carts were going through the gates. There was one laden with casks, driven by an old man with a boy beside him. Robespierre was a bit drunk, but he thought himself very clever. He looked into the casks, most of them at least, and saw they were empty, and let the cart go through." A murmur of wrath and contempt went round the group of ill-clad wretches who crowded around Citizen Bibot. "Half an hour later," continued the sergeant, "up comes the captain of the guard with a squad of some dozen soldiers with him. 'Has a car gone through?' he asked the Robespierre restlessly. 'Yes,' says Robespierre, 'not half an hour ago.' 'And you have let them escape?' shouts the captain furiously. 'You'll go to the guillotine for this, citizen sergeant. That cart held the concealed ci devant Duc de Calais and all his family.' 'What?' thunders Robespierre aghast. 'Aye, and the driver was none other than that cursed Englishman, the Scarlet Pimpernel.' A howl of execration greeted this tale. Citizen Robespierre had paid for his blunder on the guillotine. But what a fool! Oh, what a fool! Bibot was laughing so much at his own tale that it was some time before he could continue. 'After them, my men!' shouts the captain, he said after a while. 'Remember the reward after them! They cannot have gone far!' And with that he rushes through the gate, followed by a dozen soldiers. 'But it was too late!' shouts the crowd headily. 'They never got them! Curse that Robespierre for his folly! He deserved his fate! Fancy not examining those casks properly!' But these sallies seemed to amuse Citizen Bibot exceedingly. He laughed until his sides ached and the tears streamed down his cheeks. 'Nay, nay,' he said at last. 'Those aristos weren't in the cart. The driver was not the Scarlet Pimpernel.' 'What?' 'No! The captain of the guard was that awful Englishman in disguise, and every one of his soldiers aristos.' The crowd this time said nothing. The story certainly savoured of the supernatural, and though the Republic had abolished God, it had not quite succeeded in killing the fear of the supernatural in the hearts of the people. Truly, that Englishman must be the devil himself. The sun was sinking low down in the west. Bibot prepared himself to close the gates. 'En avant the carts,' he said. Some dozen covered carts were drawn up in a row, ready to leave town, in order to fetch the produce for the country close by, for market the next morning. From the country nearby. They were mostly well known to Bibot, as they went through his gate twice a day, every day, on their way to and from the town. He spoke to one or two of their drivers, mostly women, and was at great pains to examine the inside of the carts. 'You will never know,' he would say, 'and I'm not going to be caught like that fool Robespierre.' The women who drove the carts usually spent their day on the Place de la Grève, beneath the platform of the guillotine, knitting and gossiping, whilst they watched the rows of tumbrils arriving with the victims the Reign of Terror claimed every day. It was great fun to see the aristos riding for the reception of Madame la Guillotine, and the places close by the platform were very much sought after. Bibot, during the day, had been on duty at the place. He recognized most of the old hats, tricotsis, as they were called, who sat there and knitted, whilst head after head fell beneath the knife, and they themselves got quite bespattered with the blood of those accursed aristos. 'Heh, le maire,' said Bibot to one of these horrible hags. 'What have you got there?' He had seen her earlier in the day with her knitting and the whip of her cart close beside her. Now she had fastened a row of curly locks to the whip handle, all colours from gold to silver, fair to dark, and she stroked them with her large bony fingers, as she laughed to Bibot. I made friends with Madame Gildine's lover, she said with a coarse laugh. He cut these off for me from my head as they rolled down. He has promised me more tomorrow, but I don't know if I shall be in my usual place. Ah, how is that, La Mare? Asked Bibot, who, hardened soldier as he was, could not help shuddering at the awful loathsomeness of this semblance of woman, with a ghastly trophy on the handle of her whip. My grandson has got the smallpox, she said, with a jerk of her thumb towards the inside of her cart. Some say it's the plague. If it is, I shan't be allowed to come to Paris tomorrow. At the first mention of the word smallpox, Bibot would hastily step backwards, and when the old hag spoke of the plague, he retreated from her as fast as he could. Curse you, he muttered, whilst the whole crowd hastily avoided the cart, leaving it standing all alone in the midst of the place. The old hag laughed. Curse you, citizen, for being a coward, she said. Bah, what a man to be afraid of sickness. Mon bleu, the plague! Everyone was awestruck and silent, filled with horror of the loathsome malady, the one thing which still had the power to arouse terror and disgust in these savage, brutalized creatures. Get out with you, and with your plague-stricken brood, shouted Bibot hoarsely. With another rough laugh and coarse jest, the old hag whipped up her lean nag and drove her cart out of the gate. This incident had spoilt the afternoon. The people were terrified of these two horrible curses, and the two maladies which nothing could cure, and which were the precursors of an awful and lonely death. They hung about the barricade, silent and sullen for a while, eyeing one another suspiciously, avoiding each other as if by instinct, lest the plague lurked already in their midst. Presently, as in the case of Robespierre, a captain of the guard appeared suddenly, but he was known to Bibot, and there was no fear of his turning out to be a sly Englishman in disguise. A cart! He shouted breathlessly, even before he reached the gates. What cart? Asked Bibot roughly. Driven by an old hag, a covered cart. There were a dozen. An old hag instead of son had the plague? Yes. You don't let them go? Mon bleu, said Bibot, whose purple cheeks had suddenly become white with fear. The cart contained the Sieur de Vaughan Comité de Tournay, and their 2 children, all of them traitors and condemned to death. And their driver? Muttered Bibot as a superstitious shudder ran down his spine. Sacré tonnerre, said the captain. That it is feared that he was the cursed Englishman himself, the Scarlet Pimpernel. Chapter 2. Dover, a Fisherman's Rest. In the kitchen, Sally was extremely busy. Saucepans and frying pans were standing in rows on the gigantic hearth. The huge stock pot stood in a corner, and the jack turned with slow deliberation, and presented alternately to the glow every side of a noble sirloin of beef. The 2 little kitchen maids bustled around, eager to help, hot and panting, with cotton sleeves well tucked up above the dimpled elbows, and giggling over some private jokes of their own, whenever Miss Sally's back was turned for a moment. And old Jemima, stolid in temper and solid in bulk, kept up a long and subdued grumble while she stirred the stock-pot methodically over the fire. What-ho, Sally! Came in cheerful, if none too melodious accents from the coffee-room close by. Lord bless my soul! exclaimed Sally with a good-natured laugh. What they all be wanting now, I wonder? Beer, of course, grumbled Jemima. You don't expect Jimmy Picton to have done with 1 tankard, do ye? Mr. Harry, you look uncommon thirsty, too, simpered Martha, one of the little kitchen maids, and her beady black eyes twinkled as they met those of her companion, whereupon both started on a round of short and suppressed giggles. Sally looked cross for a moment and thoughtfully rubbed her hands against her shapely hips. Her palms were itching, evidently, to come in contact with Martha's rosy cheeks, but inherent good humor prevailed, and with a pout and a shrug of the shoulders, she turned her attention to the fried potatoes. What-ho, Sally? Hey, Sally! And of course the pewter mugs tapped with impatient hands against the oak tables of the coffee-room, accompanied the shouts of her mine host's buxom daughter. Sally, shouted a more persistent boy, are you going to be all night with that there beer? I do think father might get the beer for them, muttered Sally, as Jemima, stolidly and without further comment, took a couple of foam-crowned jugs from the shelf, and began filling a number of pewter tankards with some of that home-brewed ale for which the Fisherman's Rest had become famous since the days of King Charles. He knows how busy we are in here. Your father is too busy discussing politics with Mr. Ebseed to worry himself about you in the kitchen, grumbled Jemima under her breath. Sally had gone to the small mirror which hung in the corner of the kitchen, and was hastily smoothing her hair and setting her frilled cap at its most becoming angle over her dark curls. Then she took up the tankards by their handles, 3 in each strong brown hand, and laughing, grumbling, blushing, carried them through into the coffee-room. There was certainly no sign of that bustle and activity which kept 4 women busy and hot in the glowing kitchen beyond. The coffee-room of the Fisherman's Rest is a show-place now at the beginning of the 20th century. At the end of the 18th, it was in the year of grace 1792, it had not yet gained that notoriety and importance which 100 additional years and the craze of the age have since bestowed upon it. Yet it was an old place even then, for the oak rafters and beams were already black with age, as were the panelled seats with their tall backs and the long polished tables between, on which innumerable pewter tankards had left fantastic patterns of many-sized rings. In a lighted window, high up, a row of pots of scarlet geraniums and blue larkspur gave the bright note of colour against the dull background of the oak. That Mr. Jellyband, landlord of Fisherman's Rest at Dover, was a prosperous man, was of course clear to the most casual observer. The pewter on the fine oak dressers, the brass above a gigantic hearth, shone like silver and gold. The red tiled floor was as brilliant as the scarlet geranium on the window-sill. This meant that his servants were good and plentiful, that the custom was constant, and of that order which necessitated the keeping up of the coffee-room to a high standard of elegance and order. As Sally came in, laughing through her frowns and displaying a row of dazzling white teeth, he was greeted with shouts and a chorus of applause. "Why, there's Sally! What ho, Sally! Hurrah for pretty Sally!" "I thought you'd grown deaf with that kitchen of yours," muttered Jimmy Picton, as he passed the back of his hand across his very dry lips. All right, laughed Sally, as she deposited the freshly filled tankards upon the table. Why, what an hurry to be sure! You took grandmother a dying, and you want to see the poor soul afore she'd gone. I never did see such a mighty rushing. A chorus of good-natured laughter greeted this witticism, which gave the company there present food for many jokes for some considerable time. Sally now seemed in less of a hurry to get back to her pots and pans. A young man with fair curly hair and eager bright blue eyes was engaging most of her attention, and the whole of her time, whilst broad witticisms Annette, Jimmy Picton's fictitious grandmother, flew from mouth to mouth, mixed with heavy puffs of pungent tobacco smoke. Facing the hearth, his legs wide apart, a long clay pipe in his mouth, stood mine host himself, worthy Mr. Jellyband, landlord of the Fisherman's Rest, as his father had been before him, aye, and his grandfather and great-grandfather too, for that matter. Portly in build, jovial in countenance, and somewhat bald of pate, Mr. Jellyband was indeed a typical rural John Bull of those days, the days when our prejudiced insularity was at its height, when to an Englishman, be he lord, yeoman, or peasant, the whole of the continent of Europe was a den of immorality, and the rest of the world an unexploited land of savages and cannibals. There he stood, mine worthy host, firm and well set upon his limbs, smoking his long churchwarden and caring nothing for nobody at home and despising everybody abroad. He wore a typical scarlet waistcoat with shiny brass buttons and corduroy breeches and grey worsted stockings and smart buckled shoes that characterized every self-respecting innkeeper in Great Britain in these days. And while pretty motherless Sally had either 4 pairs of brown hands to do all the work that fell on her shapely shoulders, worthy Jellyband discussed the affairs of nations with his most privileged guests. The coffee-room, indeed, lighted by 2 well-polished lamps which hung from the raftered ceiling, looked cheerful and cosy in the extreme. Through the dense clouds of tobacco smoke which hung about in every corner, the faces of Mr. Jellyband's customers appeared red and pleasant to look at, and on good terms with themselves, their host, and all the world. From every side of the room, loud guffaws accompanied pleasant, if not highly intellectual conversation, while Sally's repeated giggles testified to the good use Mr. Harry Waite was making of the short time she seemed inclined to spare. They are mostly fisher folk who patronize Mr. Jellyband's coffee-room. The fishermen are known to be the very thirsty people. The salt which they breathe in when they are out on the sea accounts for their parched throats when on shore. But the Fisherman's Rest was something more than a rendezvous for these humble folk. The London and Dover coach started from the hostel daily, and the passengers who had come across the Channel, and those who started for the Grand Tour, all became acquainted with Mr. Jellyband, his French wines, and his home-brewed ales. It was toward the close of September 1792, and the weather, which had been brilliant and hot throughout the month, had suddenly broken up. For 2 days, torrents of rain had deluged the south of England, doing its level best to ruin what chances the apples and pears and late plums had of becoming really fine, self-respecting fruit. Even now it was beating against the leaded windows and tumbling down the chimney, making the cheerful wood fire sizzle in the hearth. "Lud, did you ever see such a wet September, Mr. Jellyband?" asked Mr. Hempseed. He sat in one of the seats inside the hearth, did Mr. Hempseed, for he was an authority and an important personage not only in the Fisherman's Rest, where Mr. Jellyband always made a special selection of him as a foil for political arguments, but throughout the neighbourhood, where his learning and notably his knowledge of the Scriptures was held in the most profound awe and respect. With one hand buried in his capacious pockets of his corduroys, underneath his elaborately worked, well-worn smock, the other holding his long clay pipe, Mr. Hempseed sat there looking dejectedly across the room at the rivulets of moisture that trickled down the window-panes. "No," replied Mr. Jellyband sententiously. "I dunno, Mr. Hempseed, as I ever did, and I've been in these parts nigh on 60 years. "Aye, you wouldn't recollect the first 3 years of them 60, Mr. Jellyband," quietly interposed Mr. Hempseed. "I dunno as I'd ever seen an infant take such much note of the weather, leastways not in these parts, and I have lived here nigh on 75 years, Mr. Jellyband." The superiority of this wisdom was so incontestable that for the moment Mr. Jellyband was not ready with his usual flow of argument. "It do seem more like April than September, don't it?" continued Mr. Hempseed dolefully, as a shower of raindrops fell with a sizzle onto the fire. "Aye, that it do," assented the worthy host. "But then, what can you expect, Mr. Hempseed, I says, with such a government as we've got?" Mr. Hempseed shook his head with an infinity of wisdom, tempered by deeply rooted mistrust of the British climate and the British government. "I don't expect nothing, Mr. Jellyband," he said. "Poor folks like us is of no account up there in London. I knows that, and it's not often that I do complain. But when it comes to such wet weather in September, and all me fruit are rotting and a dying like the guption's mother's firstborn, and doing no more good than they did, poor dears, save to a lot of Jews, peddlers, and sich, with their oranges and sich like foreign ungodly fruit, which nobody'd buy if English apples and pears was nicely swelled. As the Scriptures say." "That's quite right, Mr. Hempseed," retorted Jellyband. "And I says, what can ye expect? There are all them Frenchy devils over the channel yonder a murdering their king and nobility, and Mr. Pitch and Mr. Fox and Mr. Buck a fighting and a wrangling between them, if we Englishmen should allow them to go on their ungodly ways." "Let 'em murder," said Mr. Pitch. "Stop 'em," said Mr. Burke. "And I say let 'em murder," said I, "and be a hymn to them," said Mr. Hempseed emphatically, for he had but little liking for his friend Jellyband's political arguments, wherein he always got out of his depths, and had little chance of displaying those pearls of wisdom which had earned for him so high a reputation in the neighbourhood, and so many free tankards of ale at the Fisherman's Rest. "Let 'em murder," he repeated again, "but don't let out such rain in September, for that is agin the law and the Scriptures, which says—" "Lud, Mr. Harry, how you made me jump!" It was unfortunate for Sally and her flirtation that this remark of hers should have occurred at the precise moment when Mr. Hempseed was collecting his breath in order to deliver himself of one of those scriptural utterances which had made him famous, for it brought down upon her pretty head the full flood of her father's wrath. "Now then, Sally, me girl, now then," he said, trying to force a frown upon his good-humoured face. "Stop that fooling around with them jackanapes and get on with the work. The work's getting all right, father." But Mr. Jellyband was peremptory. He had no other views for his buxom daughter, his only child, who would in God's time become the owner of the Fisherman's Rest, than to see her married to one of these young fellows who earned but a precarious livelihood with their net. "Did you hear me speak, me girl?" he said in that quiet tone which no one inside the inn dared disobey. "Get on with my Lord Tony's supper, for, if it ain't the best we can do, and ye not satisfied, see what you'll get, that's all." Reluctantly, Sally obeyed. "Is you expecting a special guest in tonight, Mr. Jellyband?" asked Jimmy Picton, in a loyal attempt to divert his host's attention from the circumstances connected with Sally's exit from the room. "Aye, that I be," replied Jellyband. "Friends of my Lord Tony himself, dukes and duchesses from over the water yonder, whom the young lord and his friend, Sir Anthony Ffoulkes, and many and other young noblemen have helped out of the clutches of them murdering devils. But this was too much for Mr. Hempseed's querulous philosophy. Lud, he said, what do they do that for, I wonder? I don't hold not with interfering other folks' ways, as the Scripture says. Maybe, Mr. Hempseed, interrupted Jellyband with biting sarcasm, as you're a personal friend of Mr. Pitt, and as you says along with Mr. Fox, let him murder, says you. Pardon me, Mr. Jellyband, feebly protested Mr. Hempseed. I don't know as I ever did. But Mr. Jellyband had at last succeeded in getting upon his favourite hobby horse, and had no intention of dismounting in any hurry. Or maybe you've made friends with some of them French chaps who they say have come over here, on the purpose to make us Englishmen agree with their murdering ways. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Jellyband, suggested Mr. Hempseed. All I know is, loudly asserted mine host, that there was my friend Peppercorn, who owns the Blue-Faced Boar, and as true and loyal an Englishman as you'd see in the land. And now look at him. He made friends with some of those frog-eaters, open up with them just as if they was Englishmen, and not just a lot of immoral, godforsaken foreign spies. Well, and what happened? Peppercorn, he ups and talks the revolutions and the liberty down with the aristocrats, just like Mr. Hempseed over here. Pardon me, Mr. Jellyband, again interposed Mr. Hempseed feebly. I don't know as I ever did. Mr. Jellyband had appealed to the company in general, who were listening awestruck and open-mouthed at the recital of Mr. Peppercorn's defeculations.
I think I was right. Defecting.
Yeah. At one table, two customers, gentlemen apparently by their clothes, had pushed aside their half-finished game of dominoes and had been listening for some time, and evidently with much amusement, to Mr. Jellyband's international opinions. One of them now, with a quiet, sarcastic smile, still looking round the corners of his mobile mouth, turned toward the centre of the room where Mr. Jellyband was standing. You seem to think, my honest friend, he said quietly, that these Frenchmen, spies I think you call them, are mighty clever fellows to have made mincemeat, so to speak, of your friend Mr. Peppercorn's opinions. How did they accomplish that now, you think? Lord, sir, I suppose they talked them over. Those Frenchies, I have heard it said, have got the gift of gab, and Mr. Hempseed here will tell you how it is that they let us twist some people round the little finger, like. Indeed, and is that so, Mr. Hempseed? Inquired the stranger politely. Nay, sir, replied Mr. Hempseed, much irritated. I don't know as I can give you the information you require. Faith, then, said the stranger, let us hope, my worthy host, that these clever spies will all succeed in upsetting your extremely loyal opinions. But this was too much for Mr. Jellyband's pleasant equanimity. He burst into an uproarious fit of laughter, which was soon echoed by those who happened to be in his debt. Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! Ho ho! Hee hee! He laughed in every key here, my worthy host, and laughed until his sides ached and his eyes streamed. At me, Lord, hark at that! Did you hear him say that you're setting my opinions? Lord love you, sir, but you do say some queer things. Well, Mr. Jellyband, said Mr. Hempseed sententiously, you know what the Scriptures say? Let him who stands take heed lest he fall. But then, hark ye, Mr. Hempseed, retorted Jellyband, still holding his sides with laughter. The Scriptures didn't know me. Why, I wouldn't so much as drink a glass of ale with one of them murdering Frenchmen, and nothing to make me change my opinion. Why, I've heard it said that them frog-eaters can't even speak the King's English, so, of course, if any of them tried to speak their god-forsaken lingo to me, why, I should spot them directly, see? And forewarned is forearmed, as the saying goes. Aye, my honest friend, assented the stranger cheerfully. I see that you are much too sharp, and a match for any 20 Frenchmen. And here's to your very good health, my worthy host, if you'll do me the honour to finish this bottle of mine with me. I am sure you're very polite, sir, said Mr. Jellyband, wiping his eyes, which were still streaming with the abundance of his laughter. And I don't mind if I do. The stranger poured out a couple of tankards full of wine, and having offered one to mine host, he took the other himself. You're Englishmen, as we all are, he said, whilst the same humorous smile played round the corners of his thin lips. Loyal as we are, we must admit that this, at least, is one good thing which can come to us from France. Aye, no, it'll none of us deny that, sir, assented mine host. And here's to the best landlord in England, our worthy host, Mr. Jellyband, said the stranger in a loud tone of voice. Hip, hip, hurrah! retorted the entire company present. Then there was loud clapping of hands, and mugs and tankards made a rattling music upon the tables, with the accompaniment of loud laughter at nothing in particular, and then Mrs. Jellyband's muttered exclamations. Just fancy me being talked over by an God-forsaken foreigner. What? Love you, sir, but you do say some queer things. To which obvious fact the stranger heartily assented. It was certainly a preposterous suggestion that anyone could ever upset Mr. Jellyband's family-rooted opinions anent the utter worthlessness of the inhabitants of the whole continent of Europe. That really was more of an Irish accent.
What for?
Anyway.
Chapter 3. The Refugees. Feeling in every part of England certainly ran very high at this time against the French and their doings. Smugglers and legitimate traders between the French and English coasts brought snatches of news from over the water which made every honest Englishman's blood boil, and made him long to have a good go at those murderers, who had imprisoned their king and all his family, subjected the queen and the royal children to every species of indignity, and were even now loudly demanding the blood of the whole Bourbon family, and of every one of its adherents. The execution of the Princess Lamballe, Marie Antoinette's young and charming friend, had filled every one in England with unspeakable horror. The daily execution of scores of royalists of good family, whose only sin was their aristocratic name, seemed to cry for vengeance to the whole of civilized Europe. Yet with all that, no one dared to interfere. Burke had exhausted all his eloquence in trying to induce the British government to fight the revolutionary government of France, but Mr. Pitt, with characteristic prudence, did not feel that this country was fit yet to embark on another arduous and costly war. It was for Austria to take the initiative. Austria, whose fairest daughter was even now a dethroned queen, imprisoned and insulted by a howling mob, and surely it was not, so argued Mr. Fox, for the whole of England to take up arms because one set of Frenchmen chose to murder another. As for Mr. Jellyband and his fellow John Bulls, though they looked upon all foreigners with withering contempt, they were royalists and anti-revolutionists to a man, and at this present moment were furious with Pitt for his caution and moderation, although they naturally understood nothing of the diplomatic reasons which guided that great man's policy. But now Sally came running back, very excited and very eager. The joyous company in the coffee-room had heard nothing of the noise outside, but she had spied a dripping horse and rider who had stopped at the door of the Fisherman's Rest, and while the stable boy ran forward to take charge of the horse, pretty Miss Sally went to the front door to greet the welcome visitor. "I think I'd see my Lord Antony's horse out in the yard, father," she said, as she ran across the coffee-room. But already the door had been thrown open from outside, and the next moment an arm, covered in drab cloth and dripping with the heavy rain, was round pretty Sally's waist, while a hearty voice echoed along the polished rafters of the coffee-room. "Ay, and bless your brown eyes for being so sharp, my pretty Sally," said the man who had just entered, whilst worthy Mr. Jellyband came bustling forward, eager, alert, and fussy, as became the advent of one of the most favoured guests of his hostel. "Lud, I protest, Sally," added Lord Antony, as he deposited a kiss on Miss Sally's blooming cheeks, "but you are growing prettier and prettier every time I see you, and my honest friend Jellyband here must have hard work to keep the fellows off that slim waist of yours. What say you, Mr. Waite?" Mr. Waite, torn between his respect for my lord and his dislike for that particular type of joke, only replied with a doubtful grunt. Lord Anthony Dewhurst, one of the sons of the Duke of Exeter, was in those days a very perfect type of a young English gentleman, tall, well set up, and broad of shoulders and merry of face. His laughter rang loudly wherever he went. A good sportsman, a lively companion, a courteous, well-bred man of the world, with not too much brains to spoil his temper, he was a universal favourite in London drawing-rooms, or in the coffee-rooms of village inns. At the Fisherman's Rest, everyone knew him, for he was fond of a trip across to France, and always spent a night under worthy Mr. Jellyband's roof on his way back, or on his way there or back. He nodded to Waite, Pitkin, and the others as he at last released Sally's waist, and crossed over to the hearth to warm and dry himself. As he did so, he cast a quick, somewhat suspicious glance at the two strangers who had quietly resumed their game of dominoes, and for a moment a look of deep earnestness, even of anxiety, clouded his jovial young face. But only for a moment. The next he had turned to Mr. Hempseed, who was respectfully touching his forelock.
Well, Mr. Hempseed, and how is the fruit? Badly, my lord, badly, replied Mr. Hempseed dolefully. But what can you expect with this 'ere government favouring them rascals over in France, who would murder their king and all their nobility? Odd's life, retorted Lord Antony. So they would, honest Hempseed. At least those they can get a hold of, worse luck. But we have got some friends coming here tonight who at any rate have evaded their clutches. It almost seemed, when the young man said these words, as if he threw a defiant look towards the quiet strangers in the corner. Thanks to you, my lord, and to your friends, I've heard it said Mr. Jellyband. But in a moment Lord Antony's hand fell warningly on mine host's arm. Hush, he said peremptorily, and instinctively once again he looked towards the strangers. Oh, lud love you, they're all right, my lord, retorted Jellyband. Don't you be afraid. I wouldn't have spoken only I knew we were among friends. That gentleman over there is as true and loyal a subject of King George as you are yourself, my lord, saving your presence. He is but late arrived in Dover, and is settling down in business in these parts. In business? Faith, then, it must be as an undertaker, for I vow I have never beheld a more rueful countenance. Now, my lord, I believe that the gentleman is a widower, which no doubt would account for the melancholy of his bearing. But he is a friend, nevertheless, I'll vouch for that, and you will own, my lord, that who will judge of a face better than the landlord of a popular inn? Oh, that's all right, then, if we are among friends, said Lord Antony, who evidently did not care to discuss the subject with his host. But tell me, you have no one else staying here, have you? No one, my lord, and no one coming either, leastways. Leastways? No one your lordship would object to, I know. Who is it? Oh, my lord, Sir Percy Blakeney and his lady will be here presently, but they ain't a-going to stay. Lady Blakeney? Queried Lord Antony in some astonishment. Ah, my lord, Sir Percy's skipper was here just now. He says that my lady's brother is crossing over to France today in the Daydream, which is Sir Percy's yacht, and Sir Percy, my lady, will come with him as far as here to see the last of him. If you don't, it don't put you out, do it, my lord? No, it doesn't put me out, friend. Nothing will put me out unless that supper's not the very best which Miss Sally can cook, and which has ever been served in the Fisherman's Rest. You need have no fear of that, my lord, said Sally, who all this while had been very busy setting the table for supper. And very gay and inviting it looked, with a large bunch of brilliantly coloured dahlias in the centre, and the bright pewter goblets and blue china about. How many shall I lay for, my lord? 5 places, pretty Sally, but let the supper be enough for 10 at least. Our friends will be tired, and I hope hungry. As for me, I vow I could demolish a baron of beef tonight. Here they are, I do believe, said Sally excitedly, as a distant clatter of horses and wheels could now be distinctly heard, drawing rapidly nearer. There was general commotion in the coffee-room. Everyone was curious to see my Lord Antony's swell friends from over the water. Miss Sally cast 1 or 2 quick glances at the little bit of a mirror which hung on the wall, and worthy Mr. Jellyband bustled out in order to give the first welcome himself to the distinguished guests. Only the 2 strangers in the corner did not participate in the general excitement. They were calmly finishing their game of dominoes, and did not even look once towards the door. Straight ahead, Comtesse, the door's on your right, said a pleasant voice outside. Aye, there they are, all right enough, said Lord Antony joyfully. Off with you, my pretty Sally, and see how quick you can dish up the soup. The door was thrown wide open, and preceded by Mr. Jellyband, who was profuse in his bows and welcomes, a party of 4, 2 ladies and 2 gentlemen, entered the coffee-room. Welcome, welcome to old England, said Lord Antony effusively, as he came eagerly forward, with both hands outstretched toward the newcomers. Ah, you are Lord Antony Dewhurst, I think, said one of the ladies, speaking with a strong foreign accent. At your service, madame, he replied, as he ceremoniously kissed the hands of both of the ladies, then turned to the men and shook them both warmly by the hand. Sally was already helping the ladies to take off their travelling coats, and both turned with a shiver towards the brightly blazing hearth. There was a general movement among the company in the coffee-room. Sally had bustled off to her kitchen, whilst Jellyband, still profuse with his respectful salutations, arranged 1 or 2 chairs around the fire. Mr. Hempseed, touching his forelock, was quietly vacating the seat in the hearth. Everyone was staring curiously, yet deferentially, at the foreigners. Ah, messieurs, what can I say, said the elder of the 2 ladies, as she stretched a pair of fine aristocratic hands to the warmth of the blaze, and looked with unspeakable gratitude first at Lord Antony, then at one of the young men who had accompanied her party, and who was busy divesting himself of his heavy cape coat. Only that you are glad to be in England, Comtesse, replied Lord Antony, and that you have not suffered too much from your trying voyage. Indeed, we are glad to be in England, she said, while her eyes filled with tears, and we have already forgotten all that we have suffered." Her voice was musical and low, and there was a great deal of calm dignity and of many sufferings nobly endured marking in the handsome aristocratic face, with its wealth of snow-white hair dressed high above the forehead after the fashion of the times. "I hope my friend Sir Andrew Ffoulkes proved an entertaining travelling companion, madame." "Ah, indeed, Sir Andrew was kindness itself. How could my children and I ever show enough gratitude to you all, messieurs?" Her companion, a dainty, girlish figure, childlike and pathetic in its look of fatigue and of sorrow, had said nothing as yet, but her eyes, large, brown, and full of tears, looked up from the fire and sought those of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, who had drawn near to the hearth and to her then, as they met his, which were fixed with unconcealed admiration upon the sweet face before him. A thought of warmer colour rushed up to her pale cheeks. "So this is England," she said, as she looked around with childlike curiosity at the great open hearth, the oak rafters, and the yokels with their elaborate smocks and jovial, rubicund British countenances. "A bit of it, mademoiselle," replied Sir Andrew, smiling, "but all of it at your service." The young girl blushed again, but this time a bright smile, fleet and sweet, illumined her dainty face. She said nothing, and Sir Andrew too was silent, yet those two young people understood one another, as young people have a way of doing all the world over, and have done since the world began. "But I say supper!" here broke in Lord Antony's jovial voice. "Supper, honest Jellyband! Where is that pretty wench of yours and the dish of soup? Zooks, man, while you stand there gaping at the ladies, they will faint from with hunger." One moment, my lord," said Jellyband, as he threw open the door that led to the kitchen and shouted lustily, "Sally! Hey, Sally there! Are ye ready, my girl?" Sally was ready, and the next moment she appeared in the doorway carrying a gigantic tureen, from which rose a cloud of steam and an abundance of savoury odour. "Odd's life, supper at last!" ejaculated Lord Antony merrily, as he gallantly offered his arm to the Comtesse. "May I have the honour?" he added ceremoniously, as he led her towards the supper table. There was general bustle in the coffee room. Mr. Hempseed and most of the yokels and fisherfolk had gone to make way for the quality, and to finish smoking their pipes elsewhere. Only the two strangers stayed on quietly and unconcernedly, playing their game of dominoes and sipping their wine, whilst at another table, Harry Waite, who was fast losing his temper, watched pretty Sally bustling round the table. She looked a very dainty picture of English rural life, and no wonder that the susceptible young Frenchman could scarcely take his eyes off her pretty face. The Vicomte de Tournay was scarcely 19, a beardless boy, on whom the terrible tragedies which were being enacted on his own country had made but little impression. He was elegantly and even foppuously dressed, and once safely landed in England he was evidently ready to forget the horrors of the Revolution in the delights of English life. "Pardi, if this is England," he said, as he continued to ogle Sally with marked satisfaction, "I am of it satisfied." It would be impossible at this point to record the exact exclamation which escaped through Mr. Harry Waite's clenched teeth. Only respect for the quality, and notability for my Lord Antony kept his mock disapproval of the young foreigner in check. "Nay, but this is England, you abandoned young reprobate," interposed Lord Antony with a laugh, "and do not, I pray, bring your loose foreign ways into this most moral country." Lord Antony had already sat down at the head of the table with the Comtesse on his right. Jellyband was bustling round, filling glasses and putting chairs straight. Sally waited, ready to hand round the soup. Mr. Harry Waite's friends had at last succeeded in taking him out of the room, for his temper was growing more and more violent under the Vicomte's obvious admiration for Sally. "Suzanne?" came in stern, commanding accents from the rigid Comtesse. Suzanne blushed again. She had lost count of time and of place whilst she had stood beside the fire, allowing the handsome young Englishman's eyes to dwell upon her sweet face, and his hand, as if unconsciously, to rest upon hers. Her mother's voice brought her back to reality once more, and with a submissive "Yes, mamma," she too took her place at the supper table. And that's the end of chapter 3.
Huzzah.
Hurrah! We did it! So, discussion. Chapter 1. Are you any thoughts, Grace?
I remember it.
Well, let's
Sassy.
All this makes me think of, well, some of it makes me think of the movie.
Yes.
Because harkens back, of course.
The beau seems quite the character.
Yes, definitely. You know, it's interesting. They give Lord Tony, I don't know, Lord Tony seemed to be kind of in the background in the movie, you know, amongst the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel. I mean, he still played a very important part, but he just kind of seemed to be a little bit maybe in the background. And Sir Andrew seemed maybe a little bit more in the forefront. But in this chapter where they introduce both of them, it's almost like the opposite is taking place.
Yeah.
Where Lord Tony has the big role, or is the leader, kind of, and Sir Andrew is not as much, but still playing a vital role.
But he just keeps some of his boyish folks.
Sir Andrew Fuchs?
Yes, so Andrew keeps some of his boyish admiration for Suzanne, it seems like. And by the movie, our favorite version, there's two versions. The black and white version with Leslie Howard and other people, which we don't like. And then there's the other version with Jane Seymour and Anthony Andrews and Ian McKellen, which is the best version, in our humble but accurate opinion. And so that's the version we're talking about. Yes. Trying to think. Sorry.
Well, I suppose that, Bebo, is that how you say it?
I had no idea.
Bebo, I suppose, met his fate after his
Yes,
mistake.
I do suppose. I do think it's very interesting when Jellyband and Mr. Hempseed are talking about
Frenchman?
you find it? No. One of their problems was people rising above their station, if I'm getting it right. Yeah, people rising above their station, I believe. And we just watched last night The Greatest Game Ever Played, which is about a golf tournament about the common sort of layman boy of 20, not very much a boy, who ended up winning the American Open.
Versus a gentleman.
Yeah, versus the gentleman. So, of course, you know, he has to fight his way against the gentlemen who aren't acting very gentlemanly. And it just kind of reminds me of that.
I didn't get that in what Mr. Jellyband and Mr. Hempseed was talking about.
Yeah, well, I don't know where I got that. It's going marvelously, isn't it?
Okay, I very much suspect, and I did read this a long time ago, and so it's kind of hard to come back to, but I very much suspect that the strangers at the table playing dominoes are not French, are not
English.
Are not Englishmen, but are sympathetic to the French cause. The French Republic cause.
Maybe spies.
And I might even go so far as to say I think possibly the one that's speaking could be Chocolat.
Really?
I don't know,
That's quite funny, though.
why? I mean, the way he's teasing Mr. Jellyman, it's so that you are so smart that you would never, be able to catch a Frenchman in here, because, of course, they would, anyway.
Yes.
He is kind of taunting him.
Yes.
It sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I think that he's not a friend.
I was thinking he was Percy, but I don't think he could be because he's coming later on.
Yeah, exactly.
He said.
Mhm.
That would have been hilarious.
Yes.
Yes. I do like Jellyband. He seems like quite a,
Who?
Jellyband. He's like quite an eccentric not little, but eccentric fellow
Yes.
with lots of,
He kind of reminds me of. He kind of reminds me of what's his name? On.
Oh, his capital?
Yes. Sir William. No. Sir
Lucas
Lucas.
from Pride and Prejudice.
Sir William Lucas. Sir
I
Lucas.
think so.
Yeah, Sir Lucas. He reminds me of him.
Yes.
very social man and very,
Yes, or
yeah.
Mr. the cousin on Sense and Sensibility with the who gives them the cottage.
Oh yes.
Whatever his name is.
What's his name?
Anyways.
Miss Jennings this is the mother-in-law.
Right. And he's
So,
this is Brian Jennings.
anyways,
Anyways, him.
you know what we mean.
Hopefully.
We
Him.
think.
Yes, him. Let's see. He reminds me of him as well. Sir something.
Yeah.
Someone tell us who he is.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of already know us from the movie, but Suzanne and Lord, what's his name, are so going to get together.
Yes. Definitely.
Couple alert. Yes. Anyways, well, I think that we are done with our first adventure.
And our first
And our
discussion.
beautiful picture.
My Afghan's coming along splendidly.
Ow. Anyways, we shall see you all next week. And,
Hope you enjoyed this first video.
we're very sorry for our reading skills. Constant laughing and everything else. That hopefully won't be all edited out. Anyways. So yes.
Yes, so tell us how you like this first week's chapters
Do we
and
need
what
to
you
slow
think.
down?
Yes, tell us if we need to do anything different.
We will see you all next week for the next 3 chapters. And do tell us what you thought of the 3 chapters. And if you have any comments.
And your thoughts. Yes. Do comment.
Yes.
We love to hear from you.
We do.
We're desperate without your comments.
Yes.
All right,
Anyway.
everyone.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.